Hi everyone, I'm David Aragona, and this is the July 21st edition of Horses to Watch, where we look back at the last week and carefully analyze some trips, horses that encountered adversity and might be worth betting back in the future. This week, I'm taking a look back at opening week at Saratoga. It was a 4-day racing week from Thursday through Sunday. We're going to talk about 3 of those days, 4 races total, and we're going to kick things off with 2 races from that opening day Thursday, July 15th card. Let's begin with race 7. It's an allowance M1X race going 1 1/8 miles on the dirt. And let's break these runners from the gate. I want to focus on 2 horses in this field, the number 2 Southern District and the number 3 Business Model. You could see Southern District broke a little bit forwardly and stumbled a bit coming out of the gate. These 2, though, are going to wind up towards the back of the pack. There's Southern District on the rail in those Klarovich white and red silks, and Business Model in the Godolphin blue right to his outside. Now, the thing to note about this opening day dirt course at Saratoga is it was very deep, slow, and tiring. And throughout the day, we saw horses getting really fatigued on the front end, coming home very slowly. The final quarter miles all throughout this day were much slower than you typically would see at Saratoga or on a NYRA dirt track. So that's why this race is a bit of an outlier during the day, because the opening quarter and half of this race really starts to slow down, and the pace of this race is pretty slow. So they were actually able to come home much quicker in this race, and that really gave the advantage to the horses racing towards the front end. And also, I think this was a day at Saratoga, more than it being some kind of speed bias, it was a day where I don't think you really wanted to be rallying through the kickback. It was a really sandy surface, and horses that seemed to get pelted with the kickback were not running through it. And that's definitely the case with the 2 horses that I'm highlighting here. Southern District, who you can see in mid-pack there, racing on the rail, and about a length behind him is that number 3 horse Business Model, who's even further compromised by the slow pace ahead of him. The field really bunched up when they came past the half-mile pole, and the horses that are towards the front end are the ones that are ultimately going to be successful in this race as they come to the quarter pole. Look at the horses on the front. They've got relatively clean faces, clean jockey silks. Those are the ones that are successful, but there's Southern District on the rail just totally covered with dirt, and the same thing for Business Model, even worse on the outside. You can barely see those are the Godolphin blue silks because he's just completely covered in the Saratoga dirt track. His rider is. So coming through the stretch, nobody's really making up any ground, as you can see. The number 10 horse is closing a little bit, but he had already gotten to a good position coming around the far turn. And I think both the number 2 Southern District and the number 3 Business Model, who crossed the finish line together there in about 5th and 6th place, they just were not able to produce their best runs through the stretch because of that kickback situation and because of the slow pace ahead of them. So I think both of these horses are ones that you want to take a look at when they run back at a similar level next time out. The next race I want to look at is also from that opening day Thursday card. This is race 10. It's a New York bred maiden claiming race, $40,000 tag going 1.16 miles on the turf course. Let's break these runners from the gate. And once again, there are 2 that I want to highlight, the number 5 Noble Journey and the number 6 DREAMPOINT, who break right alongside each other. Now, coming out of the gate, note that the number 6 DREAMPOINT breaks with the field, but it's going to get steadied back right here. And you see Eric Cancel tugging on the reins. He's going to wind up at the back of the pack, and that's really not where you wanted to be in this race, because as you see, the fractions are going to go up. There's not a whole lot of pace developing on the front end, and the horses that were successful generally had position towards the front and were on the rail for much of the race. Now, there's DREAMPOINT towards the back getting kind of spun out into the middle of the racetrack. It's debatable how negatively affected him, but he's going to eventually get to the rail here, but he's just way too far back in the early stages of this race. Meanwhile, check out the number 5 Noble Journey on the backstretch and about that 3rd flight of runners with the purple silks down on the inside. He's the number 5 horse. Look at his rider, Junior Alvarado, who is back in the saddle, kind of bouncing up and down, and that's a telltale sign of a rider whose saddle has slipped. And it becomes really apparent as they move down the backstretch that he cannot control this horse because his legs are just kind of moving back and forth. And when the saddle slips forward on a horse, the rider just kind of loses control and isn't able to restrain him the way that he normally would. And it's compounded by the fact that Noble Journey is a little too rank under Junior, so he's really not able to get this horse back, and he's just trying to get him to settle, but he can't really get the control that he needs because that saddle slipped and is all over the place. So they're going to come into the stretch, and you're going to see he's going to try to motivate this horse a little bit, but he can't really do so. A Noble Journey, because he fought the rider for half the race, is going to fade towards the back of the pack. But now let's pick up DREAMPOINT, who at the top of the stretch here in those white and red silks is still pretty far back in the pack, and his rider still is kind of in traffic, nowhere to go. He's going to spin him all the way to the outside here, and he's the one that's closing fastest of all at the end of this race, and he really is finishing strongly here, despite the fact that the early pace was relatively slow. The field's coming together a little bit at the end, but I thought DREAMPOINT really put in an eye-catching late run, given the trouble that he had at the start and how slow the early pace was. So he's one that I think you might want to take a look at moving forward. He's had plenty of experience running in the lower level maiden claiming races, so I think he's one that you can take a look at when he drops down again in the future. I think I misstated that this was a maiden claiming race. It was actually a maiden special weight, so he's one that might be able to do a little better when he drops back down to that maiden claiming level in the future. Moving on to Friday's card at Saratoga, let's take a look at race 3 from that July 16th card. This is a New York bred optional claiming 40,000. Non-winners of 2 other than is the allowance condition, and it's going 1 mile and 16th on the turf course, the same distance as the race that we just watched. Let's break these runners from the gate, and I want to focus on the number 6 Chocolate Cookie, who was the favorite in this race, and you can see right there in that orange cap and blue silks, she stumbles coming out of the starting gate, and that's detrimental to her because she's a runner who figured to be pretty forwardly placed in this race. This was just a paceless race on paper, and she was one that looked like had the ability to show some tactical speed, and she was just unable to do it once she stumbled at the start and found herself relegated to the back of the pack. And that turned out to be really detrimental because this pace was even slower than the one that we just watched from Thursday. They're just kind of walking on the front end. The horse who's leading the way is a long shot who their other riders just kind of ignored because they figured she'd come back to the field. So they're just basically waltzing down the backstretch through very slow fractions. You're going to see the half mile go up in 50 plus seconds, and there is Chocolate Cookie at the back of the pack, not where you want to be, trying to pass the entire field. And it's going to be no surprise that the horse who does win this race is the number 2 Jacosa, who is sitting in the perfect spot right off that overmatched front runner. She's going to be able to take over and get the jump on all of the other horses. Now, Irad Ortiz, who's riding Chocolate Cookie, who was coming off a layoff here, he's trying to do the right thing by just reserving her until the stretch run, and he's going to try to produce a sprint finish once they get into the stretch, but it's really tough to pass the entire field when everybody's conserving energy, and they're all had that same plan to sprint for the wire once they turn for home. So you can see Irad still has plenty of force underneath him coming to the quarter pole here. He's going to try to save as much ground as possible, and now here he angles to the outside to try to make that move into the lane. It's not really that detrimental. He had to go into the forepath because he had saved some ground on the turn, but the entire field now, as I said, is sprinting for home, and she really is finishing strongly at the end of this race, and she's going to do well to get up for third, beaten, I think, less than 2 lengths by the winner, Jacosa, but she just couldn't win this race given how much she had to make up from the top of the stretch home. So I think Chocolate Cookie as a horse, as the favorite, didn't really put in that disappointing of a performance, even though she lost this race, and if she comes back at the same level next time, she's almost certain to get a little more pace to close into, so she's one that I would definitely upgrade when she returns at this same level. Let's finish things up with a race from the Saturday card. Actually, one of the stakes races from Saturday. There were 2, the Diana and this Grade 3 Sanford that we're going to take a look at now. This was race 9 on that July 17th card. Let's break these runners from the gate. It was a pretty large field of 11, and we'll begin by looking at the head-on and watch number 5, Dance Code, who you could see right there. He stumbles a little bit coming out of the starting gate, and that really affected him because he kind of went to his knees, his legs splayed out, and he just couldn't really get his momentum going coming right out of the starting gate. And you see as we pick up the pan here, he's pretty far back in the pack given how badly he stumbled coming out of the gate. But for a horse who was inexperienced, having just 1 prior start under his belt, having never gone this far before with all these horses stretching out to 6 furlongs for the first time, I thought he actually put in a pretty respectable effort. The impressive winner of this race was the number 1 Wit, who's launching a pretty eye-catching far-turn move right now. But Dance Code is doing what he can racing along the rail to try to follow that move. He's about 4 lengths behind Wit at this point, but there he is coming to the quarter pole, splitting horses in that second flight of runners, and he's taking a good run at the leaders here. He just has a lot of ground to make up because of that stumbling start, but he's finishing up pretty gamely in this race. As I said, Wit was much the best and is just going to destroy destroy this field coming down to the wire. But there are plenty of other tired runners that really didn't do a whole lot of running from the back of the pack, not able to overcome that kickback in traffic in the early portion of this race. So I think Dansko deserves some credit for getting up for third here. I think he got a buyer of 60 for this race, a dip a little bit from the 68 buyer that he got in his debut. But this runner goes out for some low-profile connections from Parks, Juan Vasquez. He was ridden by Jose Lezcano here. And I'm not saying that he's going to win races like the Saratoga Special or the Hopeful, but he's a Pennsylvania bred that we could see potentially show up in some out-of-town races. They're a little bit easier. So Dansko is one to put in your stable and see if he shows up in a race at a different circuit next time, because he ran deceptively well behind that impressive winner of the Sanford. So those are all the horses to watch for this week. Remember, if you want to follow these horses moving forward, you can add them to your horse watch on DRF.com and get watch mail when these horses run back in the future. Just add these horses to a list and you'll get email notifications when they are entered for their future races. So thanks for tuning in this week, and make sure to catch future episodes of Horses to Watch on upcoming Wednesdays.